Hollywood, 1954. The ballroom of the Beverly Crest Hotel glowed like a palace of gold. Crystal chandeliers spilled light over velvet curtains, polished marble floors, and rows of tuxedos and gowns that shimmered like a sea of stars. 300 people filled the room: studio executives, actors, reporters, producers, and legends in the making. It was one of those nights where reputations were built and destroyed. Dean Martin stood near the back of the room, holding a glass of soda water with lime. Most people thought it was whiskey. They always did. He didn't correct them anymore. Dean wasn't here to perform. He wasn't here to charm the crowd. He was here because he had been invited reluctantly to a studio celebration honoring Western cinema. And the king of that world was here tonight. John Wayne. Wayne entered like thunder. Tall, broad, confident. His boots echoed across the ballroom floor as conversations stopped one by one. Heads turned, shoulders straightened, smiles tightened. This was Duke Wayne, the man who owned the screen, the sets, and sometimes even the people around him. And tonight, he was in a bad mood. Dean watched from a distance as Wayne shook hands, accepted praise, laughed loudly. But something in his eyes wasn't laughing. It was sharp, hunting. And then his gaze found Dean. Wayne leaned toward a producer and muttered something. The producer glanced at Dean and smirked. 5 minutes later, the host stepped up to the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, tonight we celebrate the legends of American film, men of grit, honor, discipline, and strength." Applause thundered. And before we continue, I'd like to invite Mr. John Wayne to say a few words. More applause. Wayne took the mic slowly, too slowly. He looked around the room, then let his eyes land on Dean Martin. A smile crossed his face, not kind, not playful. "Coldwell," Wayne said into the microphone, his voice booming across the ballroom. "I see Hollywood's favorite lounge singer decided to show up tonight." Light laughter. Wayne paused. "Funny thing is, I'm surprised he's still standing." The laughter thinned. Wayne tilted his head. Dean Martin, the man who can't tell the difference between a stage and a bar stool. A few people laughed awkwardly. Wayne wasn't done. "Hell, I heard he had to be carried out of his last film set because he was too drunk to remember his own lines." Now the room went silent. 300 people, dead quiet. Every eye turned to Dean. Dean felt the heat rise in his chest, not anger first, but humiliation. Public, loud, cruel. Wayne leaned closer to the mic. Some people earn respect with discipline. Others just drown in a glass and call it talent. The room froze, and then Wayne finished it. "So tell me, Dean, did you bring your courage tonight, or just your bottle?" Gasps rippled through the ballroom. Eyes on Dean Martin. He didn't move, didn't speak, didn't react. He just stood there. The old Dean, the one from years ago, would have fired back with a joke, a jab, something sharp and loud. But this Dean, he was tired of proving himself with words. He set his glass down on a nearby table and began to walk forward. Each step echoed louder than Wayne's boots had. People leaned back in their chairs. Some whispered. Some held their breath. Wayne watched him approach, amused. Dean stopped 3 feet from the stage. He didn't look angry. He didn't look drunk. He looked calm, centered. "Still," John Dean said quietly. But the microphone picked it up anyway. "You're right about one thing." Wayne smirked. "I don't win respect with shouting." Dean lifted his eyes. "I win it with how I stand when I'm being kicked." The room stiffened. Dean continued. "You see, Duke, I've been called worse than drunk. I've been called useless, worthless, a joke." He paused, but funny thing about jokes. He looked around the room. They last longer than bullies. A few murmurs. Wayne shifted. Dean kept going. "I don't need to tell people who I am. I just let time do it." Wayne laughed. "Time won't fix a man who can't fix himself." Dean met his eyes. "No," Dean said, "but it will expose the ones who think they're untouchable." Silence. Dean turned and walked away. He didn't shout. He didn't insult. He didn't beg. He just left the stage area while the room stayed frozen. John Wayne stood there holding the microphone for the first time all night. He didn't look powerful. He looked uncertain. And somewhere deep inside that ballroom, something had shifted. Because everyone there had just seen something rare. A man insulted in front of 300 people. Who didn't collapse, didn't explode, didn't run. He stood and walked with dignity. And that is where the real story begins. The night after the ballroom incident, Hollywood didn't sleep. By morning, every studio hallway, every coffee shop, every casting office was buzzing with the same story. Did you hear what John Wayne said to Dean Martin? Yeah, in front of 300 people, and Dean just walked away. Some people said Dean was finished. Others said he was finally exposed. But Dean Martin didn't read the headlines. He didn't call reporters. He didn't defend himself. He went to work. At 6 in the morning, he walked onto a quiet soundstage where a low-budget drama was being filmed. No cameras yet, no lights, just dust, cables, and a few tired crew members. The director was shocked to see him. "Dean, you didn't have to come this early." Dean smiled calmly. "I did." While others talked about him, he prepared. He rehearsed every line, every movement, every emotion. No jokes, no shortcuts, no swagger, just discipline. For years, people had mistaken his relaxed charm for laziness. They thought his smile meant he didn't care. But the truth was different. Dean had learned long ago that the loudest response to disrespect is excellence. By noon, the crew gathered. When the camera rolled, something changed. Dean wasn't playing a role. He was living one. His voice carried pain. His eyes carried truth. His presence filled the room. After the take, the set went silent. Then the director whispered. Again, they ran it again and again. Each time, Dean delivered something deeper. By the end of the day, the same crew members who had doubted him were standing, watching him like they were seeing him for the first time. One of the grips leaned over and said quietly, "Man, he's not what they say he is." Words started traveling, not from newspapers, not from gossip columns, from sets, from crews, from people who saw the work. Meanwhile, John Wayne heard nothing. He was still the Duke, still powerful, still praised. But something about that night stayed with him. Dean's calm, Dean's eyes, Dean's words. You don't win respect with shouting. You win it with how you stand when you're being kicked. Wayne replayed it more than once. Days passed, then weeks. And slowly, something strange happened. Studios started talking about Dean differently. Not as a joke, not as a drunk, but as a professional. A producer said, "Get me Dean Martin. He delivers." A director said, "He listens. He works. He respects the craft." And one afternoon, a major script landed on Dean's table. A serious role. No singing, no comedy. Just raw acting. The part was meant to prove something. Dean didn't celebrate. He just nodded and said, "I'll be ready." That night, alone in his house, Dean stood in front of the mirror. He looked at his reflection, not as a star, not as a target, but as a man who had been publicly humiliated and chose not to break. He didn't beat John Wayne with words. He didn't attack him in public. He did something harder. He outgrew him in silence. And that's when the real power started shifting. Not in ballrooms, not in headlines, but in respect. And John Wayne was about to feel it. John Wayne had always believed something simple. Respect was taken, not given. For decades, he had walked into rooms and watched people straighten their backs, lower their voices, and make space for him. Power had become normal. Control had become habit. But lately, something felt off, not in the world. In himself. Ever since the night at the Beverly Crest Ballroom, Dean Martin's face had stayed in his mind. Not angry, not broken, just calm, steady, unmoved. Wayne told himself it meant nothing. Yet when he stepped onto sets, something had changed. Crew members were still polite. Actors were still respectful. But the fear was gone. People didn't shrink anymore. They worked, they watched, they judged. One afternoon, Wayne visited a soundstage where Dean was filming his new dramatic role. He told himself it was curiosity, nothing more. He stood at the back, unnoticed, as the scene was prepared. Quiet on set, the camera rolled. Dean stepped into frame, and Wayne felt it instantly. This wasn't the Dean from lounges or talk shows. This was a man stripped down to truth. Dean's voice was controlled. His movements were precise. His silence spoke louder than dialogue. In one scene, Dean delivered a line about dignity under pressure. His eyes didn't beg. They didn't fight. They endured. Wayne felt something tighten in his chest. The take ended. No one clapped. No one moved. They were still inside the moment. The director finally whispered, "Cut." Then people exhaled. Wayne stayed where he was. He watched Dean walk off set, towel around his neck, sweat on his face, eyes tired but focused. No crowd, no applause, just work. Wayne realized something uncomfortable. Dean hadn't been pretending all these years. Wayne had been projecting. The drunk label, the jokes, the easy mockery, they were shields. Because it was easier to dismiss someone than to admit you might be wrong. That night, Wayne sat alone in his trailer. He didn't pour a drink. He didn't turn on the radio. He just sat. And for the first time in years, he thought about who he really was. Without the image, he remembered growing up poor, remembered being overlooked, remembered how much it hurt to be judged before being known, and suddenly he saw Dean differently. Not as a rival, not as a joke, but as a man who had survived the same kind of judgment and refused to let it define him. Wayne whispered to himself, "I got that one wrong." The next day, he asked his assistant for Dean Martin's schedule, not to confront him, not to challenge him, but to understand him. Because Wayne was starting to realize something that power had hidden from him for years. Real strength doesn't humiliate, it listens. And soon, he would get the chance to prove it. The invitation arrived quietly. No headlines, no cameras. Just a simple card delivered to Dean Martin's home. Private industry dinner. Small guest list, no press. Dean read it twice, then once more. John Wayne would be there. Dean didn't hesitate. He dressed in a plain black suit. No shine, no show. Just clean lines and calm confidence. He arrived early and took a seat near the back, just like he had months before at the Beverly Crest. But this time, the room felt different. Smaller, quieter, heavier. When John Wayne entered, there was no thunder, no performance, no booming laugh. He looked human. He spotted Dean almost immediately. And instead of turning away, he walked toward him. Slowly, deliberately. Every step carried weight. People noticed. Conversations stopped. Wayne stopped in front of Dean. For a moment, neither man spoke. Then John Wayne did something no one in that room had ever seen him do. He took off his hat, he lowered his head, and he sat down in the chair across from Dean. Not above him, not beside him, across from him, eye to eye. "Dean," Wayne said quietly, "I owe you something." Dean didn't speak. Wayne continued. "That night, I was wrong. I tried to make myself bigger by making you smaller." He paused, and it worked. On the room, then he looked directly at Dean, "But not on you." The words stayed in the air. Wayne's voice changed. "I watched your work. I watched your discipline. I watched how you carry yourself when nobody's clapping." His jaw tightened. "You didn't break. You didn't strike back. You didn't beg." He swallowed. You outgrew me." The room was silent. Wayne leaned forward. "I spent my life thinking power meant control." He shook his head. "You showed me it means restraint." Then, slowly, John Wayne stood up. And in front of that private room of executives and legends, he lowered himself. One knee touched the floor. Not for drama, not for attention, but for respect. "I'm sorry, Dean." No cameras captured it. No headlines printed it. But everyone in that room felt it. Dean stood. He reached down. He helped Wayne back to his feet. "John," Dean said calmly, "respect isn't earned in public. It's proven in private." Wayne nodded, and for the first time in years, he smiled without armor. That night, two legends didn't compete. They understood each other. And the room learned something powerful. True strength doesn't humiliate. It heals.